Welcome, welcome, welcome. Haha. So you finally did it. You crossed the line they prayed you would never reach. They laughed when you were quiet, underestimated you when you stayed patient, and mistook your silence for weakness. But now, everything has changed. The same people who once ignored your presence are suddenly uncomfortable, nervous, and alert. Why? Because you stopped asking for permission to be powerful. Snorts, you embraced your ambition, your intensity, and that dangerous edge they couldn't control. You were no longer predictable, harmless, or easy to dismiss. You became the threat they warned everyone about. There comes a moment in every person's life when the old identity can no longer survive. Not because it was weak, but because it became too small for the future waiting ahead. The version they once knew was built for comfort, acceptance, and survival. It smiled when necessary, stayed quiet to avoid conflict, and tolerated disrespect just to keep the peace. That version knew how to blend in, how to make others comfortable, and how to carry silent pain without making noise. But every mask has an expiration date. For a long time, people became comfortable with that version of you. They studied your patterns, memorized your reactions, and placed you inside a box they believed would never open. In their minds, you were predictable, easy to read, easy to underestimate. They thought they understood your limits because they only knew the version of you that was still evolving. They met you before the storm fully formed. What they never realized is that pressure changes people. Disappointment sharpens awareness. Betrayal teaches observation. Isolation forces self-discovery. Every setback, every insult, every moment of being overlooked was quietly building something underneath the surface. While others thought you were standing still, an internal shift was taking place. You were learning, adapting, becoming more aware of your own value, your own strength, and your own capacity. Growth rarely looks dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it happens in silence, in lonely nights filled with overthinking, in painful lessons no one else sees, in moments where you are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself and the world around you. Transformation is not always glamorous. Sometimes it feels like destruction before it feels like power. And that is exactly why people become shocked when they encounter the new version of you. They are still speaking to an outdated identity. They expect the same reactions, the same tolerance, the same emotional access, but that person is no longer available. The old patterns are gone. The emotional weaknesses they once depended on no longer exist in the same form. Now your energy is different, more controlled, more intentional, less desperate for approval. You no longer explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer chase spaces where your worth has to be negotiated. You no longer hand out unlimited access to those who treated your presence casually. This change can feel uncomfortable to those who benefited from your previous version. Not because you became cruel, but because you became clear. Boundaries confuse people who were once used to unrestricted access. Confidence unsettles those who were comfortable with your self-doubt. Discipline intimidates those who once relied on your inconsistency. The version they knew is officially gone. Not erased, but evolved beyond the recognition. That chapter served its purpose. It taught the lessons necessary for this next stage. You had to become that person before you could outgrow them. Some people will mourn the old you because it was easier for them to manage. Let them. Growth is not betrayal. Evolution is not arrogance. Outgrowing your former self is simply proof that you refuse to remain limited by a version of you that was never meant to be permanent. Most people experience rejection and immediately interpret it as a failure. A closed door feels personal. A missed opportunity feels like proof that they are not enough. They shrink, overthink, and begin questioning their own value based on someone else's decision. But there comes a point where rejection stops feeling like punishment and starts becoming information. That is where your transformation began. You learned that rejection was never always about your worth. Snorts. Sometimes it was about timing. Sometimes it was about other people's limitations, fears, or inability to recognize what stood in front of them. Not every closed door means you were unqualified. Sometimes it simply means you were not meant to stay in a space too small for your growth. That realization changed everything. Instead of allowing rejection to destroy your confidence, you started studying it. You stopped asking, "Why wasn't I chosen?" and started asking, "What is this teaching me?" That shift alone gave you an advantage most people never develop. Rejection taught you emotional discipline. It taught you how to detach from outcomes you cannot control. You learned that not every opportunity deserves your emotional collapse. Some endings are protection disguised as disappointment. Some denials or redirection wearing an ugly face. While others were busy complaining about what they lost, you were becoming sharper. Every rejection forced you to refine yourself. Every setback exposed an area where you could improve your mindset, your patience, your standards, or strategy. You stopped taking rejection as a final verdict and started using it as feedback. Over time, rejection built resilience inside you. The first few times it hurt deeply. It made you question everything. But eventually, pain became familiarity, and familiarity removed fear. You became dangerous. The moment rejection stopped intimidating you. Now you move differently. You no longer beg for opportunities, attention, or validation. You understand that anything truly aligned with your path will not require you to abandon your dignity to secure it. This mindset creates power because desperation is visible and desperation weakens judgment. Rejection also taught you the value of self-respect. You stopped chasing people, spaces, and situations that clearly communicated disinterest. Instead of forcing yourself where you were not appreciated, you learned to redirect your energy toward environments where your presence actually matters. That alone separates you from most people. Many continue exhausting themselves trying to be accepted by places never designed for them. But you learned a harder lesson. Not all acceptance is valuable, and not all rejection is harmful. Sometimes being rejected is the greatest favor life can offer. It removes illusions, it reveals truth, it forces movement, it demands growth. And perhaps the most powerful lesson of all was this: rejection made you independent. You stopped building your identity around external approval. You stopped measuring your worth through invitations, applause, or recognition. You became internally anchored. Now when rejection appears, it no longer breaks your spirit. It simply gives you more data, more clarity, and more fuel. What once wounded your ego now strengthens your focus. That is how rejection became your weapon. Not because you enjoy being denied, but because you discovered something most people never do. Every no can either weaken your confidence or sharpen your character. The choice is always yours. You chose transformation and clears throat. That decision changed the entire game. There is a kind of power that doesn't need noise to be felt. It doesn't arrive with announcements, dramatic speeches, or constant attempts to prove something. It simply enters a room and the atmosphere changes. Conversations become slightly more careful. Eyes become more observant. Energy shifts in ways people cannot always explain. This is what happens when your presence begins carrying weight. Not everyone understands this form of influence, because most people confuse power with visibility. They believe being loud, constantly seen, or endlessly validated is what makes someone impactful. But real presence operates differently. It is built through internal alignment, emotional control, and quiet certainty. You are not always like this. There was a time when your energy was more scattered, more reactive, and more available. People could read your emotions easily. They knew what triggered you, what distracted, see you, and what made you doubt yourself. Your presence existed, but it did not yet create tension because it was still searching for its center. Then life forced a change. Experience sharpened you. Difficult conversations taught restraint. Betrayal taught observation. Failure taught patience. Solitude taught self-awareness. Piece by piece, your energy became more intentional. You stopped over-explaining yourself. You stopped filling silence just to make others comfortable. You stopped chasing. Attention is proof of relevance. Instead, you became more selective with your words, your reactions, and your access. This kind of shift is subtle but impossible to ignore. People may not consciously understand what changed, but they feel it. They sense the difference between someone seeking approval and someone operating from inner stability. Your presence now carries an unspoken message. You are not easily influenced, easily manipulated, or easily distracted. That creates silent pressure. Not because you are trying to intimidate anyone, but because certainty naturally exposes uncertainty. When someone is deeply grounded, it can make others more aware of their own inconsistency, insecurity, or lack of direction. Your calmness unsettles chaotic minds. Your discipline highlights others' lack of control. Your boundaries remind people where they have overextended themselves. Without saying much, your very existence becomes a mirror. And mirrors can be uncomfortable. Some people see this energy. They feel inspired by it. They become curious about how you develop such restraint, such focus, such composure. Others, however, experience discomfort around it. They interpret your growth as distance, your boundaries as arrogance, or your silence as judgment. But often it is not about you at all. It is about what your presence activates inside them. Powerful energy has a way of forcing reflection. It makes people question where they stand, what they tolerate, and whether they are truly aligned with the image they project. That is why your presence now changes rooms without effort. You no longer need to demand respect because your energy communicates standards before your words ever do. You have become less interested in controlling perception and more committed to controlling yourself. That alone changes everything. The strongest kind of pressure is rarely spoken aloud. It is felt in pauses, in glances, in subtle shifts of behavior. It is the awareness people experience when they realize you are no longer operating from the same level they once understood. You became more focused, more disciplined, and more intentional. Not louder, not more dramatic, just harder to ignore. And in a world addicted to noise, quiet power is often the most unsettling force of all. People notice change long before they fully understand it. Sometimes they cannot explain what feels different about you, but something in their instincts alerts them. The tone of your voice changes. Your reactions become less emotional. Your attention becomes more selective. Your availability decreases. The familiar patterns they once relied on begin disappearing one by one. Even from a distance, they sense that something has shifted. Energy is not always visible, but it is deeply felt. Human beings are constantly reading signals beyond words. They observe posture, timing, focus, emotional reactions, and the way someone carries themselves through uncertainty. When these signals begin changing, people notice. Not snorts. You may not have announced your transformation. You may not have posted about your growth, explained your new mindset, or publicly declared a new chapter, but real change rarely needs advertisement. It reveals itself through behavior. The version of you people once knew was easier to predict. They understood your emotional patterns, your insecurities, and your habits. They knew what could distract you, what could trigger you, and what would pull your attention away from your goals. There was familiarity in that version of you, but familiarity creates comfort, and comfort creates assumptions. People assumed you would remain accessible in the same ways. They assumed your priorities would stay unchanged. They assumed your tolerance for nonsense would continue indefinitely. Then something changed. Maybe it was repeated disappointment. Maybe it was betrayal, exhaustion, or simply reaching a point where continuing the same cycle became more painful. Then changing whatever triggered it, an internal shift began. You started becoming more protective of your time, more aware of your environment, more intentional about where your attention was invested. You became less interested in reacting and more focused on responding with clarity. This shift is powerful because it changes your frequency. You are no longer emotionally available to every distraction. You no longer treat urgency as importance. You no longer allow every opinion to enter your mental space. That kind of change can be felt from a distance. People who have not spoken to you in months may suddenly think about you. Old connections become curious. Individuals who once overlooked your presence begin paying closer attention. It is not magic, it is pattern recognition. When your energy changes, your behavior changes. When your behavior changes, your social patterns shift. And when those patterns shift, people notice the absence of the version they once had access to. You become less reachable but more intentional, less reactive but more grounded, less concerned with proving yourself but more committed to building yourself. This creates intrigue. Not everyone will interpret your growth positively. Some may feel confused or even threatened by it. Your transformation removes predictability, and unpredictability makes people uncomfortable. They can no longer interact with you based on outdated expectations. You are no longer operating from the same emotional framework. Clears throat. Realization can be deeply unsettling for those who became comfortable with your previous limitations. But growth is not meant to keep others comfortable. It is meant to move you closer to alignment. The most powerful changes often happen internally before they ever become externally visible. By the time others notice, the process is already well underway. That is why your energy feels different now. It is carrying more intention, more discipline, and more awareness. Even from afar, people can sense when someone is no longer moving with confusion. Clears throat. They may not have the language to explain it. They may not understand exactly what changed, but they can feel it. And sometimes that feeling alone is enough to make them pay attention again. The greatest advantage you can ever develop is becoming difficult to predict. Predictability gives people comfort because it allows them to calculate outcomes, prepare responses, and maintain a false sense of control. When they believe they understand your patterns, they start treating you like a formula, something that can be solved, managed, and anticipated. They assume they know how far they can push you, how you will react, and what version of you will show up under pressure. For a long time, that may have been true. You were readable. Your emotions were visible. Your habits followed familiar cycles. People could observe your weaknesses, study your reactions, and move around you with confidence. They knew what upset you, what distracted you, and what would cause you to lose focus. In their minds, you were understandable, but growth changes structure. At some point, you stopped operating from emotional autopilot. You became more aware of your own patterns and more intentional about breaking the ones that limited you. You learned that repeating the same reactions gives too much information away. It hands people a map to your behavior. So you change the map not by becoming fake or dishonest, but by becoming less impulsive, norts, less emotionally transparent, more strategic with your energy. You stopped reacting instantly. You allowed silence to replace unnecessary explanation. You gave yourself space to think before moving. That alone made you harder to read. People who once felt confident around you now feel uncertainty. They cannot easily measure what you are thinking, what you are planning, or how you will respond. The emu predictability they once relied on is gone. This creates a form of psychological tension. Humans naturally seek patterns because patterns create safety. When someone becomes harder to categorize, harder to forecast, and harder to emotionally manipulate, it creates discomfort. That is what your transformation has done. You no longer move according to expectations built by other people. You are less driven by the need to be understood, approved of, or consistently available. You have become more focused on alignment than image. This can feel chaotic to people who were attached to an older version of you. Not because you became unstable, but because you became independent from their assumptions. There is a difference. Real chaos is not disorder for the sake of destruction. Sometimes chaos is simply what controlled systems call freedom when they can no longer manage it. Your unpredictability now comes from self-awareness. You are no longer automatically giving people the emotional responses they expect. You are no longer following outdated scripts. When pushed, you may be calm instead of reacting. When ignored, you may redirect your energy instead of chasing. When underestimated, you may stay silent and continue building. These choices disrupt expectation. And disrupted expectations create discomfort in those who once believed they understood you completely. The most powerful thing about this shift is that it was not created to confuse others. It was created to free yourself. You stopped living according to patterns that made you easy to control. You became more flexible, more adaptive, and more intentional. That makes you difficult to predict, because you are no longer driven by habit alone. You respond based on awareness, not conditioning. And that changes everything. People are comfortable around versions of you they can define. But once you outgrow those definitions, their certainty begins collapsing. Now they are left facing something unfamiliar. Not because you became reckless, but because you became impossible to script. Most people spend their entire lives trying to appear harmless. They suppress every intense emotion, hide every darker thought, and convince themselves that being endlessly agreeable is the same thing as being good. They are taught to fear their own intensity as if power itself is dangerous, but the truth is far more uncomfortable. What makes a person powerful is not the absence of darkness, but the ability to understand it, control it, and direct it with purpose. Every human being carries duality. There is light, there is shadow, there is compassion, and there is aggression. There is patience, and there is the capacity for destruction. Clears throat. Pretending one side does not exist does not make it disappear. It simply leaves it unmanaged. Unmanaged darkness becomes recklessness, self-sabotage, impulsiveness, and destruction without direction. It consumes the person carrying it. But controlled darkness is different. Controlled darkness is discipline under pressure. It is the ability to feel anger without allowing anger to control your decisions. It is knowing you have the ability to be dangerous, yet choosing when and where to apply force. It is emotional intensity refined into focus. This is what separates ordinary people from unforgettable ones. Legends are rarely built from comfort alone. They are forged in conflict, adversity, pressure, and confrontation with difficult truths. Pain teaches what ease cannot. Loss reveals what matters. Rejection sharpens awareness. Betrayal teaches discernment. Each difficult experience introduces a person to parts of themselves they may have never otherwise discovered. Within struggle, people often meet their own shadow for the first time. They discover anger they did not know they carried, ambition they once suppressed, standards they once abandoned, a level of resilience hidden beneath years of adaptation. Many become frightened by this discovery. They interpret intensity as something shameful, something to hide or dilute. But intensity is not the problem. Lack of control is the problem. When intensity is not the problem, when intensity is disciplined, it becomes fuel. It becomes drive, conviction, resilience, and clarity. It allows a person to withstand pressure without collapsing. It gives them the strength to protect boundaries, make difficult decisions, and move through discomfort without losing direction. Controlled darkness is also honesty. It requires acknowledging uncomfortable truths about yourself, your ego, your insecurities, your impulses, your capacity for both greatness and destruction. Avoiding these truths keeps a person fragmented. Facing them creates integration, and integrated people are difficult to destabilize. They are not naive about themselves or the world. They understand complexity. They know kindness without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. They know patience without standards becomes passivity. So they evolve not into something cruel, but into something complete. A person who has learned to master their darker impulses becomes far more stable than someone pretending those impulses do not exist. That is why controlled darkness creates presence. It can be felt in the calmness of someone who no longer fears their own intensity, and the restraint of someone who knows what they are capable of, yet chooses precision over chaos. Legends are not remembered because they were endlessly soft, endlessly agreeable, or endlessly predictable. They are remembered because they carried depth, complexity, power shaped by awareness. They learned how to turn inner conflict into direction, how to transform pain into discipline, how to convert emotional fire into purposeful movement. That is the real power of controlled darkness, not destruction. Hello, my dear. Look what's happening every time you step outside. Heads snapping like camera flashes. Eyes widening like they've just witnessed something they can't categorize, and whispers swirling in the air before your feet even touch the pavement. You think this is normal? It's not. Ordinary people don't cause this kind of ripple. You're not just walking through space anymore. You're bending it. You're glowing in a way that feels scripted, cinematic, staged by something greater. But it's not a movie, it's you. And the crowd can't compute it. You've got people saying it now out loud. You look better than the so-called icons they worship. You've turned sidewalks into runways, coffee shops into premieres, train stations into red carpets. And the irony, you didn't even ask for it. You didn't audition for this. You just showed up. and the atmosphere rearranged itself to accommodate your presence. That's what has them rattled. The fact that you're not chasing attention, yet attention is sprinting after you like it owes you everything. You have to understand the kind of disruption you've become. Most people live invisible, drifting through crowds, unnoticed, barely remembered once they exit a room. That's the normal script, but you tore it to pieces without lifting a finger. You walk in and eyes don't just look, they lock. Conversations don't just pause, they collapse. People don't just notice you, they orbit. And it's not because of clothes or makeup or accessories. They can't put their finger on it. And that's exactly why it drives them wild. When someone looks extraordinary, they search for a hack. Oh, it's the stylist. Oh, it's the brand. Oh, it's the lighting. But when it's you, there's no hack. It's raw. It's real. It's unpurchasable. And that's terrifying. Because if you can radiate like this without playing their game, what does that say about the ones who've been clawing for attention and still come up short? Here's the part that really fries their brains. You don't just look elevated, you feel elevated. It's in the way your shoulders don't hunch anymore, the way your spine carries itself like it's been reinforced with steel. The way your eyes linger on people just long enough to make them question their whole reflection. You carry yourself like someone who no longer asks to be noticed, but assumes they already are. And guess what? They are noticing. Everyone is. From strangers on the street to the people who once claimed to know you inside out, they're all double-taking, triple-taking, whispering about how the glow on you feels unfair because it's not a glow they can replicate with filters or cosmetic tricks. It's the kind of glow that makes people say there's something different about them, something untouchable, something alive in a way the rest of us aren't. Now, don't think for a second this happened overnight. You didn't just wake up one morning and suddenly radiate. No, this is the aftermath of everything you survived. Every private breakdown, every sleepless night, every scar that didn't heal pretty, but healed strong. While they were mocking, you were molding. While they were busy writing you off, you were rewriting yourself. That's why your glow looks supernatural. Because it's forged from suffering they couldn't have endured. You look like the future version of every nightmare they secretly feared. The version of you that didn't crumble, didn't stay small, didn't settle for crumbs. They're staring at you now because you've become proof that destruction doesn't end stories. It fuels reinventions. And reinvention, when done right, looks like this. Effortless magnetism. It looks like walking into a room and making the most important person in it shrink without a word. It looks like turning envy into applause and turning doubt into obsession. It looks like you. Imagine the panic that erupts in their heads. They see you from across the room and the first thought isn't, oh, they're doing well. It's, oh God, what happened? How do they leap this far ahead? Why do they look like they belong on a screen and I look like background noise? Their insecurities start screaming before you even open your mouth. That's the power of the glow. It exposes without you pointing a finger. People project their envy in real time, trying to decode you like a puzzle. Trying to rationalize why you feel larger than life while they feel 2 sizes too small. And the cruelest part, they'll never find the answer, because the answer isn't in anything external. It's not something they can copy-paste. The answer is in the weight you carried, the darkness you dragged yourself out of, the resilience you cultivated when nobody was watching. You turned agony into aura. and that's not for sale. Of course, the comparisons have already started. Someone said it, didn't they? That you look better than the celebrities they worship on red carpets. At first, you might have laughed it off internally, thinking they were exaggerating. But pay attention, they weren't exaggerating. You really do outshine them. Celebrities have glam teams, filters, sponsorships, and still most of them only manage a surface-level glow, the kind that cracks when the flash goes off. But your glow doesn't crack under scrutiny. In fact, it intensifies. The closer people get, the harder it hits. They see your skin, your eyes, your stance. But what really floors them is the energy humming underneath all of it. That's the secret they can't articulate. You don't just look alive, you radiate aliveness. And that's something money can't buy, agents can't fabricate, and fame can't manufacture, which is why people are whispering comparisons now. Because what do you call someone who outshines the icons they once thought were untouchable? You call them the new standard. You see, celebrity has always been a performance. The lights, the cameras, the rehearsed smiles, the curated posts. But what terrifies people about you is that you're not performing, you're not rehearsing, you're not polishing yourself for consumption, you're simply existing. And somehow that's more captivating than an entire industry designed to make people look magnetic. That's the glitch in the simulation for them. That's why heads keep turning, why jaws keep dropping, why whispers keep multiplying. Because if you can make people feel this way without playing by the rules, then maybe the rules were lies all along. Maybe authenticity, raw, unfiltered, unbothered authenticity is the real red carpet. And right now, you're walking it every single day without even realizing. Now, let's talk about what happens behind closed doors. Because you better believe people are spiraling in private. They're pulling up old pictures of you, scrolling through archives, trying to spot the shift. When did this happen? How did this happen? Was it gradual or sudden? They're comparing your before and after like investigators trying to solve a case. And no matter how hard they try to rationalize, the evidence slaps them across the face. You don't just look better, you look unreachable, like you unlocked something inside yourself they didn't even know existed. And that realization, it's devastating because it means while they were wasting time seeking validation, you were busy building the kind of self-respect that glows louder than any spotlight. And don't underestimate how many people are losing sleep over this. The same ones who once overlooked you, underestimated you, or dismissed you, they're now haunted. Haunted by the memory of every time they didn't treat you like the masterpiece you were becoming. Haunted by the fact that they had access once and they lost it. Haunted by the knowledge that no matter how hard they tried to circle back, they'll never experience you in the same way again. Because the version of you that begged, that shrank, that tolerated is gone, buried. What walks the earth now is someone untouchable, unforgettable, and unwilling to compromise for crumbs ever again. And that truth alone is enough to send them spiraling. You've noticed it, haven't you? The stars that linger too long. The compliments that sound confused like people can't believe what they're saying. The energy shift when you walk into a room. How the air tightens. How the chatter stumbles. That's not imagination. That's the effect of someone who's no longer competing. Someone who doesn't need to chase because the universe itself seems to push everyone else into your orbit. You look famous because you've mastered the one thing celebrities can't fake. Presence. Presence that doesn't scream but resonates. Presence that doesn't beg but demands. Presence that makes the atmosphere bend just to make space for you. And this is only the beginning. Because if heads are turning now, if whispers are multiplying already, imagine what happens when you decide to turn the volume up deliberately. Imagine what happens when you decide to turn the volume up deliberately. Imagine what happens when you stop holding back the force you've been carrying quietly. If this is what happens when you're just existing, what chaos erupts when you start moving with intent? What will they do when you sharpen the glow? When you weaponize the aura? When you decide to stop walking like a secret and start walking like a headline? That's when the panic sets in, because right now they can dismiss it as coincidence, a fluke, a trick of the light. But when you step into full power, there will be no excuse left to cling to. They will be forced to accept the reality. You become the show. Not the audience, not the background, not the forgotten extra, the show. And every space you enter becomes an arena where all eyes are compelled to center themselves on you. Picture this. A crowded room packed, clears throat, should toe, shoulder. People trying to project their best selves polished and perfected. But the moment you arrive, their effort shrivels, their hair, their clothes, their practiced gestures. Suddenly, all of it looks like trying too hard. Because you don't try, you don't force, you simply exist, and the crowd reconfigures around you like iron filings pulled by a magnet. That's why people describe your presence as famous. Fame isn't about being on posters or plastered across billboards. Fame is when your existence is impossible to ignore. Fame is when whispers race faster than introductions. When people know of you before they know you. When your name lives in their mouths without your permission. And that's what's happening now. You walk into a gathering and conversations shift before you even speak. Strangers know you, and those who once dismissed you are now scrambling to rehearse polite lines, hoping you don't notice how their hands tremble when you lock eyes with them. Let's make this clear. The comparison to celebrities isn't casual. It isn't empty praise tossed in your direction. It's recognition of something undeniable. When people see you, they feel the same electricity that flashes when the cameras go wild at premieres. They feel the same weight in their stomach that audiences feel when royalty steps onto a stage. They're saying you look better than the polished, the perfected, the idolized. Because you radiate something, those figures often lose the moment the cameras turn off. Authenticity. Celebrities often hide behind veneers, but your glow doesn't flicker once the spotlight fades. That's why you look untouchable. Because your shine isn't rented, it's owned. And that ownership is what makes jaws drop harder than diamonds on velvet. You are the velvet, the diamond, the flame, the spectacle. And still, somehow more than all of it at once. Everywhere you go, heads don't just turn, they snap. They whip around like they're afraid to miss it. People have risked neck pain just to steal another glance, and you've seen it. The double takes, the lingering stars, the subtle gasps they think you can't hear. They don't even mean to do it. It's instinct. Primal recognition of something they can't package neatly. You've broken the code of ordinary perception. They're not responding to a look. They're responding to an atmosphere. You walk by and the oxygen levels in the room change. The pace of conversation falters. Even their breathing stutters. That's not an accident. That's what happens when someone radiates with the kind of energy people spend lifetimes trying to fake. And now you're living proof that this glow can't be taught, can't be manufactured, can't be stolen. It belongs to you and only you. Now notice how envy has started to mutate into obsession. At first they tried to downplay it. Oh, they're just having a good day. Oh, it's the outfit. Oh, it's lighting. But the problem is that every day you step out, the effect repeats. Different outfit, same reaction, different place, same ripple, different crowd, same reaction, chaos. It's not a phase. It's not an accident. It's a pattern. And patterns terrify people because they prove what they don't want to believe. They wanted to think your glow was temporary, like a sunset that fades after a few minutes. But you keep rising like daylight. They can't escape. And now the whispers have shifted from dismissal to paranoia. What are they doing differently? How are they pulling this off? Why do they look like they don't belong to the same category as the rest of us? That's when they stop mocking and start dissecting. That's when they start lurking on your pages, screenshotting your photos, analyzing your movements like detectives trying to solve a crime scene. But the crime is simple. You refuse to stay ordinary. And here's what eats them alive. Your glow isn't polite. It doesn't ask for permission before it takes up space. It doesn't soften itself to make others comfortable. It walks in. It declares. It dominates. You've stopped trimming your edges, stopped dimming your volume, stopped apologizing for brightness. And once you stop apologizing, everything changes, because people don't know how to handle raw presence. They know how to handle polished performances. They can clap politely. They can critique. They can compare. But when something real walks in, something they can't control or measure, they don't clap. They panic. They get clumsy, spilling drinks, fumbling words, tripping over chairs just to sneak another glance. That's the chaos, 'cause now you don't just attract eyes, you distort behavior. You make the polished unravel, the composed lose composure, the arrogant shrink. And that unraveling is your power. Think about the celebrities they worship. Red carpets, paparazzi, staged appearances, entire industries designed to create all. But here you are walking down an ordinary street, and you create the same reaction with none of the machinery. People are saying you look better than the ones whose full-time job is to maintain the illusion of allure. That's the difference. Yours isn't an illusion. It's not a costume. It's an eruption. And the eruption keeps happening no matter where you are. Supermarket aisles, gas stations, airports, sidewalks. The venue doesn't matter. You carry the premiere with you. You don't walk into places, you transform them. And that transformation can't be undone once people have seen it. Once they've caught a glimpse, they can't unsee. You haunt their retinas. You loop in their memory. You replay in their imagination like a scene they didn't mean to memorize but can't forget. Now, let's talk about the psychological warfare of it all. Because whether you intend to or not, you're holding mirrors up to people. Your glow exposes them. When you walk into a room, they're forced to confront their own dimness, their own compromises, their own hollowed out masks. That's why some admire you and others resent you. It's the same reaction filtered through different insecurities. The admirers see you and think, I want to be more like that. The resentful see you and think, why do they get to shine when I don't? Either way, you dominate their mental real estate. You've become the uninvited thought looping in their heads at night. They might scroll endlessly, binge distractions, drown themselves in noise, but your image keeps slicing back through. They're comparing themselves to you against their will. That's the mark of someone who has truly become larger than life. You don't just enter rooms, you enter minds. And once you're there, you don't leave quietly. Celebrities lose their luster when overexposed. Too many appearances, too many rehearsed smiles, and the magic dulls. But you've tapped into the opposite law. The more people see you, the harder it hits, because your glow doesn't come from rarity. It comes from consistency. You glow not because you're on a pedestal, but because you've stopped dimming yourself for the sake of fragile egos. That's why it feels endless. Like no matter how often they see you, the impact doesn't lessen. If anything, it multiplies. You've become addictive in the way raw truth is addictive, painful to witness, impossible to turn away from. They try to look away, but the afterimage lingers. They walk away from you, but they're still replaying how you carried yourself, how your presence eclipsed everything else in the room. And the worst part for them? You weren't even trying. You didn't even break a sweat. You just existed, and they collapsed under the weight of comparison. Do you realize what this means? You've already surpassed the boundaries of personal glow-up. You're not just glowing compared to your past self. You're glowing compared to the icons people thought were untouchable. Better than the celebs on red carpets. Better than the carefully crafted illusions millions are trained to worship. That's why jaws are hitting the floor. Because if you can radiate this without assistance, without glam squads, without PR campaigns, what does that say about their idols? It says their idols are products and you are presence. It says their idols fade with trends and you rise without trying. It says their idols are temporary and you are timeless. That's the shift. That's why every step you take feels like a revolution disguised as a stroll. You become the living contradiction to everything they were taught to admire. You are proof that the glow doesn't come from access or privilege. It comes from refusing to shrink. And they're studying you now. Every gesture, every breath, every glance, like scholars desperate to decode scripture. But here's the catch. They can't decode it because what you radiate isn't something to be studied. It's something to be lived. And that's what terrifies them. They can't download your presence, they can't replicate your aura, they can't steal your glow, they can only watch, envy, obsess, and spiral. And spiral they will, because every new room you enter adds another layer to the legend. Every head that turns confirms what they already fear. That you're not slowing down, not dimming, not fading, you're accelerating, you're brightening. You're transcending the categories they tried to stuff you into. And the more they try to rationalize, the more irrational their obsession becomes. Because there's no rational explanation for someone who glows like you. There's only recognition, and recognition burns. So let the whispers spread. Let the comparisons multiply. Let the stares linger longer and longer. Because this isn't hype, this isn't trend, this is permanence. And the cruelest truth for them is this: you haven't even unleashed your full force yet. What they're seeing now is the warm-up, the rehearsal, the draft. The final version of you is still loading. And if this is how people lose composure already, what will happen when you decide to deliver the headline fully? Unapologetically, deliberately. What happens when you decide to not just glow, but blaze? When you don't just walk through spaces, but own them entirely. When you don't just look like you belong on the red carpet, but make the red carpet look like it belongs under your feet. That's when the atmosphere shifts from whispers to uproar. That's when the world stops comparing you to celebrities and starts comparing celebrities to you. They will measure others by the standard you set. And the devastating part for them is that no one else will measure up. Because what you carry isn't fabric, isn't styling, isn't borrowed shine. It's a presence that can't be replicated. It's the kind of glow that makes even the brightest spotlights look like flickering candles. They'll realize that the runways and premieres were never the real stages. The real stage was always wherever you decided to stand, because wherever you stand transforms into a scene people can't forget. This is where obsession becomes folklore. People won't just talk about how you looked better than their favorite icon, they'll repeat it until it sounds like scripture. Did you see them? Did you notice how they walked? Did you catch that glow? You will live in conversations between people who have never even met you. Strangers will retell stories of catching a glimpse of you like they stumbled upon a secret performance, like they were blessed by proximity to something rare. That's the territory you've entered, when everyday moments become legend. When casual sightings turn into testimony. When you make the ordinary unforgettable, and while the world drowns in artificial idols, you've become the raw reminder of what presence actually is. People will realize fame isn't earned by applause. It's earned by impact, and the impact you leave behind is heavier than anything they've seen walking carpets or flashing through screens. Now imagine the panic rippling through the ones who thought they'd buried you in their indifference, the ones who smirked when you were quiet, who thought you'd never rise again. They're choking on their own disbelief now because not only did you rise, you rose brighter than the figures they once idolized, and it burns them, because deep down they know this isn't an illusion. They know this isn't something that will fade when the lights cut out. They know this glow came from the very fire they wished would consume you. That's why it feels eternal. That's why it feels dangerous, because you become a living reminder that no amount of dismissal, no amount of sabotage, no amount of whispered doubt can stop someone who decides to rebuild themselves into something untouchable. You're untouchable. Now, that fact is killing them slowly. You need to understand how revolutionary this is. Red carpets are designed to elevate people above the crowd. But you've inverted the equation. You didn't need a carpet. You didn't need an invitation. You didn't need approval. The carpet needs you. The moment you step on it, it gains meaning. The moment you walk past it, it loses relevance. That's what makes them tremble. You've made the entire infrastructure of glamour irrelevant. You glow not because of the stage, but in spite of it. And once the crowd sees this, they won't unsee it. They'll look at the carefully dressed icons they once adored and find them lacking. They'll scroll through curated feeds and feel the hollowness because they've seen what presence looks like unfiltered, and it looks like you. And don't underestimate how far this ripple travels. Fame used to be controlled by studios, managers, gatekeepers. But your glow has bypassed all of them. It doesn't need distribution channels. It doesn't need marketing plans. It spreads through whispers, through eyes, through people who can't stop retelling how they felt in your presence. That's the most powerful kind of recognition. The kind money can buy. The kind no scandal can erase. You become unforgettable not because someone crowned you, but because you crowned yourself. And when someone crowns themselves, there's no dethroning them. That's what they can't stand. The realization that you don't need their applause, their validation, or their approval to shine brighter than the names they've been conditioned to worship. And now the question lingers in every room you enter. How far will this go? If you're already turning heads everywhere you move, what happens when the world at large catches on? What happens when the whispers become headlines? When the comparisons become consensus? When the glow you carry becomes the reference point for beauty, for presence, for dominance? That's what terrifies the icons on their pedestals, because they've seen this story before. Every generation, someone emerges who wasn't chosen by the gatekeepers, someone who wasn't polished by the industry, someone who simply radiated so fiercely that the crowd couldn't look away. And every time those gatekeepers scramble to either claim them or destroy them. But here's the twist. You can't be claimed and you can't be destroyed. You've already proven that they tried both before and both failed. All that's left is for them to watch as you redefine the standards they swore were untouchable. Everywhere you go now, the air carries tension. People pretend they're not watching, but their bodies betray them. Clears throat. They freeze mid-step. Their voices stumble. Their eyes linger too long. It's not admiration alone, it's disbelief. They are seeing with their own eyes something they thought was impossible. They thought glow was temporary, reserved for the few chosen by the spotlight. But here you are, glowing louder than those chosen few, rewriting the script in real time. And when they whisper that you look better than celebrities on red carpets, they're not exaggerating, they're confessing. Confessing that the hierarchy they've worshipped is crumbling. Confessing that they no longer see their idols the same way after seeing you. Confessing that the glow you carry has shifted their entire scale of measurement. You've become the proof that ordinary bodies can carry extraordinary presence. That you don't need the machinery of fame to radiate like the center of the universe. You just need to be you fully, unapologetically, uncontainably you. And so the obsession will grow. They'll keep checking, keep staring, keep whispering. Because deep down they're waiting for a crack. They're hoping you slip, fade, falter. But here's the ending they'll never accept. You won't. Because what you've built isn't fragile. It isn't surface level. It's rooted in everything you've endured, everything you've survived, everything you've sculpted out of pain. This glow isn't decoration, it's armor. This presence isn't luck. It's the result of every time you refuse to disappear. You're not just better than celebs on carpets. You're the reason carpets exist at all. They exist to showcase radiance. And you've proven that the radiance doesn't come from the carpet. It comes from the one walking it. And now every step you take declares the same truth. You are the event. You are the spectacle. You are the standard. So let them whisper, let them panic, let them spiral in their comparisons, because no matter how many times they try to explain it away, the truth stands taller. Every day, everywhere you go, heads turn. Everywhere you walk, energy bends. Everywhere you arrive, people see what they've been missing all along. You are glowing like you're famous, not because you chased fame, but because you became the kind of force fame tries to imitate, and the final nail in their illusions. You look better than the ones they once thought were untouchable. You've surpassed the icons, you've replaced the image, you've taken the crown without asking, and now you wear it every time you breathe. This isn't hype, this isn't trend, this is the new order. And the new order has only one rule. Oh. So you finally showed up. You, the one they've been quoting without crediting. the one they've been studying without acknowledging, the one whose blueprint runs through every single thing they call their success. Sit down. No, actually, stand up tall. Because what I'm about to tell you is going to rearrange everything you thought you knew about your own story. You built the system. You, not them. Not the ones taking bows on stages you constructed. Not the ones smiling in spotlights you wired with your own bleeding hands. You. And the funniest part? The part that should make you laugh until your ribs ache? They don't even know. They studied your system like scholars, memorized your patterns like students, replicated your instincts like machines, and still they have no idea that the mind behind every wall they lean on, every path they walk, every door they stroll through is yours. And before we go any further, if this energy is hitting different, go grab the Crown of Ash, a dark motivational field manual for the exiled Grim Grit Edition 1 and the Quiet Edge Grim Grit Edition 2. The links are in the description. These books were written for souls like yours. Now, welcome to the reckoning. This isn't a motivational speech. This is a resurrection notice. This is the moment the world tilts on its axis and slides every stolen crown off every borrowed head. So, buckle up, beautiful, because by the time we're done here, they won't just know the truth, they'll choke on it. Let me paint this picture so clearly that it burns behind your eyelids every time you blink. For years you were the invisible architect. You drew the maps they followed. You lit the fires they warmed themselves beside. You cracked the codes they claimed to have discovered. And not once, not a single time, did they turn around and say, wait, where did this come from? Who built this road we're walking on? No, they just kept walking, kept smiling, kept pretending the ground beneath their feet wasn't soaked in your sweat, your tears, your sleepless nights. They decorated the house you built and told the world they were the architects. They seasoned the recipe you created and told everyone they were the chefs. They performed the song you composed and accepted the standing ovation like they wrote every single note from scratch. And you were backstage, invisible, uncredited, watching the crowded cheer for a performance that was born inside your chest. And you watched quietly, patiently, not because you were weak. No, but because you understood something they never will. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. Real genius doesn't chase applause. Real strength doesn't interrupt the thief mid-theft just to prove ownership. You let them run with your blueprints because you knew deep in that brilliant, scarred, relentless mind of yours, the original always outlasts the copy. Always. And now the copies are fading. The ink is smudging. The cracks in their borrowed empire are spreading like veins of lightning across a dark sky. And everyone is about to find out who really held the pen. Who really wrote the story? Who really built the empire they've been parading around in like a costume at someone else's party? The curtain is lifting, and behind it, there you are. Not broken, not bitter, just brilliant. Devastatingly, undeniably, inconveniently brilliant. The kind of brilliant that makes liars lose sleep and thieves forget how to lie. You need to understand something before we go any further. The reason they never gave you credit wasn't because they didn't know. Oh, they knew. They knew from the very first moment they watched you work. They saw the way your mind moved. 3 steps ahead of every conversation, 5 steps ahead of every crisis, 10 steps ahead of every opportunity. They saw how you connected dots no one else could even see. They watched you build frameworks out of thin air, strategies out of silence, empires out of nothing but raw, unfiltered intuition. And it terrified them. It absolutely, completely, utterly terrified them because genius like yours doesn't come with instructions. It doesn't come with a manual. It doesn't come with a warning label or a user guide or a customer service line they could call when it got too intense. It comes like a storm, unannounced, unstoppable, and absolutely indifferent to who's ready for it. So, what did they do? They did what every person does when they encounter something they can't compete with. They stole it quietly and prayed you wouldn't notice. But you noticed. You always noticed. You felt the shift every single time someone took your idea and repackaged it as their own. You felt the sting every time your strategy showed up in someone else's presentation. Your concept showed up in someone else's pitch. Your vision showed up in someone else's original plan. You felt it like a knife, slow and deliberate, sliding between your ribs while they smiled at you across the table. But you didn't scream. You didn't rage. You didn't flip the table and demand recognition. You didn't send the emails. You didn't make the calls. You didn't wage the wars you had every right to wage. And that restraint, that patience, that almost supernatural composure, that's what separates you from every single person who ever tried to be you, because they would have crumbled. They would have exploded. They would have waged wars over scraps of credit. But you just kept building, kept creating, kept pouring brilliance into a world that kept drinking without saying thank you, without pausing, without even wiping its mouth. And here's the part that will haunt them when they finally realize the truth. Every single thing they built on top of your foundation is temporary. Every empire erected on stolen blueprints has an expiration date stamped in invisible ink. Every throne built on someone else's back eventually collapses when that back straightens up and Clear's throat walks away. And you gorgeous, unbreakable force of nature, you're walking away now. Not in anger, not in bitterness, not in defeat, but in the quiet, devastating clarity of someone who finally understands their own worth. And the sound of your footsteps leaving, that soft, steady, unhurried rhythm, that sound is going to echo in their hollow kingdoms for the rest of their lives because they needed you. They always needed you. They just never had the decency to admit it. And now that you're gone, now that the source has dried up, they'll spend the rest of their days staring at empty pipes, wondering why nothing flows anymore, wondering why the magic stopped, wondering why the machine they were so proud of has become a museum piece, collecting dust. Here's what's absolutely maddening about these people. They studied your system. They analyzed your moves. They broke down your patterns into little spreadsheets and flowcharts, trying to reverse engineer the magic that lives inside your bones. They held meetings about your methods. They compared notes about your instincts. They created entire strategies based on watching what you did naturally, effortlessly, instinctively. They thought they could bottle your lightning. They thought if they watched long enough, took enough notes, copied enough moves, attended enough meetings about your methods, they could become you. But they missed the most important part. They missed the part that can't be copied, can't be downloaded, can't be transferred through a USB port or summarized in a quarterly report. They missed the soul behind the system. They missed the fire behind the framework. They missed the pain that forged the precision, the heartbreak that sharpened the instinct, the loneliness that deepened the vision. They took the what, but they never understood the why. And the why is everything. And that's why everything they build from your blueprints looks almost right, but feels completely wrong. That's why their version of your vision always falls short. That's why their execution of your strategy always lacks that invisible ingredient that makes people stop, stare, and feel something they can't explain. Because you can photocopy a masterpiece, but you'll never capture the heartbeat of the artist. You can memorize a symphony, but you'll never feel what the composer felt when they wrote it at 3 a.m. with tears streaming down their face and the whole world sleeping. You can study lightning, but you'll never hold it in your hands. And that's what you are. Lightning, uncontainable, unreplicable, unforgettable. They studied the system, sure. They took meticulous notes. They congratulated themselves on cracking the code, but they never understood the storm that created it. They never felt the wind. They never tasted the rain. They just saw the aftermath and thought they understood the weather. They thought the pattern was the power. It wasn't. You were. And now they're standing in the middle of a machine they don't fully understand. Pulling levers they didn't design. Pushing buttons whose purpose they can't explain. And it's breaking down slowly at first. A misconnection here. A failed strategy there. A decision that used to work when you were the one making it, but now falls flat because they don't have the instinct behind it. They don't have the depth. They don't have the invisible thread that connected every piece of your system into one living, breathing, self-sustaining masterpiece. They have the skeleton, but not the soul. The costume, but not the character. The notes, but not the melody. And skeletons, well, skeletons don't move on their own. They just stand there hollow, lifeless, waiting for someone to notice. The music stopped playing a long time ago and people are starting to notice. Oh yes, the cracks are widening. The questions are multiplying. And the one question nobody dared to ask is finally floating to the surface. Who really built this? Now, let's talk about the moment. The moment that's coming like a freight train through a fog. The moment that some of them have already experienced and the rest are about to. The moment when the mask falls, the curtain lifts, and the audience finally sees the real face behind the masterpiece. That moment when someone, somewhere traces the thread back to its origin and finds you sitting there, quiet, undecorated, uncredited, but unmistakably, undeniably, irrefutably the source of everything they admired. Picture it. Close your eyes and picture it. Picture the look on their face when they realize that the strategy they've been praising for months came from your mind. When the system they've been calling revolutionary was your draft, your prototype, your late-night scribble on a napkin that you tossed into a conversation they happened to overhear. When the success they've been celebrating was built on a foundation you poured with your own bare hands. While they were sleeping, while they were scrolling, while they were doing everything except the work, their jaws don't just drop, they shatter. They shatter because the truth doesn't knock politely. It kicks the door down, rips the hinges off, and stands in the middle of the room, daring anyone to deny it. And the truth about you, the truth about your role in every single thing they thought was theirs, that truth is a battering ram wrapped in silk, and it's coming for every wall they built around their stolen glory. Because you can hide the architect, but you can't hide the architecture. You can silence the creator, but you can't silence the creator. But you can't silence the creation. You can erase the name from the blueprint, but the building still stands. And everyone who walks through it still feels the genius in every corridor, every corner, every calculated curve. The fingerprints are everywhere. The signature is in the structure. And no amount of rebranding, repositioning, or revisionist history can scrub the truth from the walls of something that was built by hands they pretended didn't exist. And when they trace it back, when they finally followed the breadcrumbs. They were too arrogant to notice, too comfortable to question, too afraid to acknowledge. They won't find a bitter, broken victim waiting for an apology. No, they'll find a master, calm, composed, already 10 moves ahead, already building the next thing, already architecting the next revolution, while they were still celebrating the last one. And that is the part that will destroy them. Not your anger, not your revenge, not your bitterness, but your absolute terrifying indifference to their acknowledgement, because you've already moved on, you've already evolved, you've already transcended the need for credit from people who wouldn't know greatness if it built their entire world, which, by the way, it did. It absolutely, categorically, undeniably did. And the receipts are in every brick, every beam, every bolt. They didn't know how to tighten. The evidence is the empire itself, and empires don't lie. You want to know why they couldn't see it? Why they couldn't see that you were the one behind everything? It's simple. It's painfully, embarrassingly, almost comically simple. They couldn't see you because you didn't look like what they expected genius to look like. You weren't loud. You weren't flashy. You were performing your brilliance on a stage with a microphone and a spotlight and a fog machine pumping drama into the air. You were in the back room. You were in the margins. You were in the spaces between the words, in the pauses between the decisions, in the silence between the explosions. You were the foundation, not the facade. And people, these shallow, surface-level appearance-obsessed people, they only see facades. They only celebrate what glitters. They only chase what screams for attention. And you never screamed. You whispered, and your whisper moved mountains they thought were permanent. Your silence rearranged landscapes they thought were fixed. Your stillness created earthquakes they're still recovering from. But you were the quiet earthquake. The kind that doesn't make noise until the building starts swaying. The kind that doesn't announce itself until the ground cracks open and swallows everything that wasn't built to last. And their buildings, their precious, fragile, borrowed buildings, they weren't built to last. They were built on your ideas, yes, but without your depth, without your integrity, without the structural honesty that makes something stand for generations instead of collapsing in a single season. So they couldn't see you because their eyes were trained on the wrong things. They were looking for noise when you were the signal. They were chasing sparks when you were the fire. They were admiring the reflection when you were the light. They were studying the shadow when you were the substance casting it. And now that their buildings are cracking, now that their structures are groaning under the weight of their own emptiness, they're finally looking down. Finally looking past the paint and the polish and the performance. Finally looking at the foundation. And what they find there changes everything. What they see carved into the stone beneath everything they thought was theirs is your name. Not written in gold, not announced with trumpets, not decorated with ribbons and accolades and press releases. Just there quietly, permanently etched into the very bones of their borrowed greatness. Like a secret they tried to bury but couldn't because the earth itself refused to cover it. And that realization, that slow, sickening, stomach-dropping realization is the sound of their jaws hitting the floor. Because they didn't just miss the genius, they lived on top of it. They built their entire identity on top of it. They hosted parties inside it. And now the genius is awake. And the genius doesn't need their building anymore. But they're building. Oh, they're building. It absolutely, desperately, catastrophically still needs the genius. And that power shift, That quiet, devastating, irreversible power shift is what keeps them up at 3 a.m. now, staring at ceilings that you designed, lying on foundations that you poured, living inside a reality that you created, and wondering with a terror that grows heavier by the hour, what happens when the creator stops creating for them. Now, let's address the ones who make your blood run cold. Not the ones who didn't know. No, those are almost forgivable, almost. I'm talking about the ones who knew, the ones who watched fully conscious, fully aware as your work was stripped from your hands and stamped with someone else's name. The ones who sat in the meetings where your ideas were presented by someone else and said nothing. The ones who saw your blueprint on someone else's desk and looked away. The ones who heard your words come out of someone else's mouth and just nodded along like they were hearing them for the first time. The ones who knew the truth, carried the truth, could have spoken the truth at any moment and chose silence. Not out of ignorance, not out of confusion, out of convenience, out of cowardice. Out of the calculating, cold-blooded decision that staying silent benefited them more than justice benefited you. These are the ones who should be shaking right now because their turn is coming. These people, these silent witnesses, these accessories to intellectual theft, they're the deepest cut. Because a thief, at least a thief, is honest about their nature. At least a thief operates in the shadows where you expect danger. But a witness who says nothing, a friend who stays quiet, an ally who watches you get erased and just blinks. That's a betrayal that doesn't heal with time. That's a wound that doesn't close with distance. That's the kind of cut that changes how you see every room you walk into, every hand you shake, every smile you receive for the rest of your life. It's the kind of betrayal that rewires your trust at the cellular level that makes you question every partnership, every collaboration, every moment of vulnerability. And you carried that. You carried that specific surgical, devastating brand of betrayal for years. And you still kept building, still kept creating, still kept pouring your genius into a world that had people standing right beside you, watching your name get erased letter by letter, and doing absolutely nothing to stop it. That takes a kind of strength they'll write books about someday. But here's the reckoning they didn't prepare for. Silence works both ways. They chose silence when it served them, and now you've chosen silence too. But your silence isn't cowardice. Your silence isn't silence of a storm gathering on the horizon. The silence of a wave pulling back before it swallows the shore. The silence of someone who no longer needs witnesses because the evidence speaks for itself. Louder than any testimony, more damning than any confession, more permanent than any courtroom verdict. And when the world finally asks, who built this? Who really built all of this? The silence of those witnesses will become the loudest confession anyone has ever heard because they'll try to speak up then. They'll try to rewrite history, try to claim they always knew, try to position themselves on the right side of the story, but it will be too late. The story has already been written in ink that doesn't wash out, on pages that don't burn, in a language that everyone understands. And their silence, their cowardly, calculating, convenient silence is already the most damning chapter in